Hey, what's going on, guys? I just wanted to show you a bit about my chipping process here and the equipments that I use. So first off, this is my desoldering tool. It's this little guy here, and I've had it for, I want to say, over 20 years now. So it's been a long time since I had this guy here, and I actually use this guy to do all of the desoldering. And it has been working pretty well so far. I've had to change the tip and the filter a couple of times because they were getting old and clogged. So that's the desoldering tool. This is the soldering tool that I use. It works pretty well. I could control the temperature on this guy here. And this is actually the ECU that I'm going to be socketing. Alright, so first off, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the desoldering tool here and make sure it's working. And usually I'll have to wait a few minutes to get this guy warmed up. I usually try to set it, around 400. Of course, the higher you set it, you got to be careful when you're desoldering to make sure that you're not on that trace a bit too long, otherwise that trace is going to peel right off. So I set it high just to get to warm up. Depending on what I'm desoldering, sometimes I'll turn it down to 350, but I normally leave it around 400. I just work carefully. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and pop this guy open here. Normally you'd have to open up the front and the back, so we'll do that. And this is a P28 ECU. It's looks like an A52, so this is probably going to be an automatic ECU, which we'll need to convert it over to a manual 5-speed. But let me go ahead and just show you the basics of what I do and how to chip this ECU, what has worked for me for over the years here. Alright, so let's get this top panel off, and let's go ahead and get the bottom panel off, because we're going to need to do that when we solder this guy back on. Alright, so for this step, usually Honda actually sprays a clear coat on this, and it would be nice, or would be better if you got some kind of rubbing alcohol or some kind of solvent to remove that. I used to do that in the past, but I felt like it didn't really help sometimes, and depending on how much they sprayed on it, sometimes it worked well, sometimes it didn't. What I normally do is I just desolder on the top of the board, and I just give it a bit more heat, and it'll basically go through and desolder for me. I'd like doing it from the top as much as I can because it looks cleaner that way from the bottom when you're viewing it from the bottom. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so I got that first row done already. It's actually not that bad. It doesn't take too long. You just have to be careful since the heat is actually pretty high. There are a few that may be hard to get to or maybe hard to desolder, and sometimes you have to work on it from both ends. And what I found out is that sometimes even that doesn't work, so I'll have to just heat the hole and then push the pin right through. And usually that's this far corner over here. This is the one that's really hard to desolder, and I find that I don't even desolder anymore. I just use a socket, put this socket in, line it up, heat it from the other side, and then just push the pin right through. So okay, let's continue with this. This is usually that's another hard one there as well. Then there's one or two over here that's hard too. That's a bit harder, and that's just in the way it's made and how it's put together. It looks like there may just be more kind of stiffer solid or joints in that area. I mean, you could try to desolder it, but I've tried it a lot of times, and it's just most of the time it's unsuccessful. And I really don't want to turn the heat up because that could damage the board, so I prefer to just put a part right through it. You know, put one of those put the actual ECU, or not ECU, the actual chip on there, and let the pin push through that solder. Alright, so I've gone through most of them. I know that there are some that's hard to get to, so I don't really worry about them until I'm actually going to solder the parts in. And usually sometimes I'll let the solder, I'll just heat the solder and then let the pin slowly seep through on the other side. So far it looks pretty good. So let's continue. Alright, so I'm gonna actually turn on my soldering iron here, set it to 450, let it heat up for a bit here. Just poured some water into this sponge here so I can clean my tip here really quick. And here is my solder. Alright, so let's get started with this here. I usually like to heat up this guy first, and then I'll just push this socket right through, because this is usually the hardest one to desolder, so I don't even attempt that anymore. I just lay it down on the other side, and then I heat this up and then try to just push it through, and once I push it through, it's in, and then it just solidifies, and then it holds it in for me. Alright, so there it is, it's in. Now I can solder the other sides. So I like to do both corners first, and then I'll push the socket up, heat it, and then push it in just to make sure it's all the way flush on the back side. You gotta make sure it's flush. Alright, so hopefully you can see that. I'm gonna go through this here really quick. Now I know you don't see this and I don't have it on, but I normally have a fan on, and the fan will blow at this here just to make sure I'm not breathing this stuff. Again, this stuff is probably not the best thing to be inhaling. Okay, next is going to be the tri-state buffer chip. This is a 20-pin chip, and there's a little notch right here, so that notch tells me that this is pin 1 over here, and pin 1 goes over here, and there's a notch right there. If you can't see it, I'll bring it up closer here. See how there's a notch right there? That means that pin 1 is down here. This guy here on the socket here, there's also a notch right here. There's a notch. Your nail will catch it if you run across it. There's a notch right here, and if there's a notch there, that means this is pin 1 here. Okay. Alright, so I normally like to flatten this a bit because the pins are a bit too high. So I'll flatten this both sides and try to just push them in together a bit there, then try to lay it on top. Make sure both sides are, make sure it's aligned on both sides, and then it looks like it is. And then the last one is the very top one, where I'll have to hold this and heat this up right here, this top corner here, so I can push that chip right through it, or that chip's pin right through it. so there it is. I feel it, and now I'm just gonna push it, and there you go. It's all the way in. And now I'm going to solder this chip in place, and I'm going to start with the opposite corner. Okay, and I'm going to heat this and push it up. Make sure it's flush against the board. Now with this chip, you want to be quick. You can't take your time because you don't want to heat up the pin and then burn the chip out. So I like to go through it as quick as I can, making sure that it's clean. So here we go. So they all look pretty good. Just gonna just put some more solder into areas that may need some, but for the most part they look pretty good. Alright, so we got that guy in. Both those guys are in, actually. Now we just have to put in the two capacitors, the J1 for the jumper, and then the R54 for the 1K resistor, and then the socketing piece is done. But if you look at this board, you can tell that it's got these extra transistors here. These are to control the transmission solenoid to shift gears. So those will need to be removed if you like. If you don't, you can leave them there, but then we'll still have to modify this bottom portion to convert it from manual over to, take that back, to convert it from automatic over to manual. But yeah, let's get started with these other four components, and then we can finish off with the conversion. Alright guys, so I actually went ahead and paused the video and desoldered these two from the back end, which made it easier for me to go ahead and continue with the soldering of these capacitors. I thought I was recording, but fortunately I wasn't. So anyhow, you've seen how I desoldered it. I did the same thing, but with the capacitor ones I had to do from the back end here. It was just easier to do from the back end, so I did it there instead. So let me go ahead and solder those, and then we'll continue with the J1 and the R54. Alright, so what I'm doing now is I'm actually just soldering the back end of this hole here for J1 so that I can push this pin right through it, and that seems to be the easiest way to do this here. So I just usually take it easy and slow, just solder and then push all the way through. And you gotta be careful because at the same time it's heating up this component here. And it's getting really hot. So I usually try to do it like this, and then I'll pull it from the other end, and then I'll finish soldering this component on. So there it is, it's on. I just have to finish soldering it. Then I'll do the same thing for the resistor. That is R54. And again, this is a 1K ohm resistor. You could, I'm using a large one, but you can actually use a smaller resistor. This one will probably hold more wattage, but it's not necessary. But because it's the one I have, I'm going to use it. So usually after I cut it, I just want to put some solder over it. It probably doesn't do anything bad if you don't put any solder over it. I mean, it'll still work, but to me it just seems to be a bit cleaner. So for the most part, this is it. It's been socketed, it's ready to go. Now all we have to do is, you know, get a base mat ready on a chip like one of these. You know, just get one of these guys ready, and then we'll just pop it in there, and then they're good to go. So this is pretty much it. I just have to finish up with converting it from an automatic to a manual, but that should be it in terms of just socketing the ECU. Alright, so let's remove RP17 and RP18, and then we need to put a jumper into RP18. So let's get started with this here. This guy's really not warm yet, so let's give this some time to heat up. I'm just going to use one of these old pins here as a jumper. These old pieces from the other components that we cut off earlier, and this is going to be my jumper for RP18. And at the same time, I'm just going to close up these other ones, this RP17 here that's not being used. Just going to fill it with solder. All right, so that is it. In a nutshell, we installed the actual chip itself. I mean the socket. I'm sorry, the socket here, the tri-state buffer here, capacitor, the R54 1K resistor, and the 0 ohm jumper for J1 here. And then we also removed RP17. Remove RP18 and then install a jumper on RP18. So that is actually it. I mean, it was pretty quick and simple. I know I didn't show or explain as much details as I could have, but I think you guys get the gist of this. It just takes some time and practice in terms of soldering, but then after a while you'll get used to it and the solder will turn out good. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it down on the comment below. If you like this, go ahead and subscribe, and hope to see you next time. Thanks.